Hello, my name is Paul Faber. I work at Pearson College, UWC in Victoria, Canada, and I'm going to be talking about popular song in early modern drama. I was a professional musician in my former life, and when I retired from music, I decided to go back to school. I was always sort of portrayed in my family as this kind of brainy person, and so I thought I'd maybe go prove it. But anyway, when I got into university, I started being interested in music history. And then, like many majors, I changed in my second year and I decided to go into English studies. And then I thought that I would combine my interests between music and Shakespeare, and that blossomed into a study of other playwrights in the drama as well. And of course, when I was a musician, I played a lot of pop music. And so I was particularly interested in the pop music scene in Shakespeare's time, which turned out to be fascinating. It's an understudied area of scholarship, and there are a few books that start ultimately in the early 20th century. But I was really actually turned on to begin my research from David Lindley's Shakespeare and Music. And then, of course, I dove into, I was blessed that we were sort of the beginning of the digital era. So I did a lot of this research. I started in about 2007 and worked through to about 2013. And at this time, we have this surge of digital collections like Early English Books Online and the wonderful Broadside Ballad archive at the University of California, Santa Barbara. And between these and some early 20th century and 19th century collections from sort of antiquarians that were set up sort of in the almost that sort of romantic period, people got very interested in ballads. And so between all of those, I had this amazing access to textual resources. And at the time, they were becoming searchable. And so to be able to search textual references, a small snippet of a song is in some play by Thomas Dekker. How do I see where this is or where it came from? It was revolutionary to be able to do that. So an amazing journey. And then I had to assemble my own database because some of these records weren't actually digitized. And so I digitized some of them myself. To do a study that ultimately became a study of just under 100 plays and all of the pop music references in it. People in Shakespeare's London are going to be hearing music in church, first of all. And of course, depending on how old you are, that music is going to have different sort of levels of complexity. When Roman Catholicism is the religion of the moment, the music is perhaps a little bit more elaborate, but then when things change, the music is much less elaborate because there was this idea that we didn't want sort of the sensual pleasures of harmony getting in the way of our worship of the divine. And then in Elizabeth's time, we have this sort of hybrid version. So you've got in some churches, especially in the country, it's singing in church is much sort of monody, so sort of one melody. But when you get into some of the churches, and particularly within Elizabeth's circle, there's a more larger parts, bigger parts. People like William Byrd and others are composing very elaborate music. So church is one facet. And then there is a surge. So we have to understand that in Shakespeare's London, there are various levels of literacy. So music and music production is happening first and foremost through bodies. So easily 50%, probably more, of the people in England can't read. And so the culture of music, as it has been happening for hundreds of years, perhaps millennia, is being disseminated from person to person through mouths and brains and instruments. And with the rise of printing, it gets cheaper and cheaper, and the rise of literacy, then you have this sort of mix where people are singing the songs that they've known, that their parents taught them, that their grandparents taught them. And these songs are being sucked up by the printers who are selling cheap books and others, and we'll talk about that in a minute, around St. Paul's Cathedral, and tinkers and what they call chapmen who would have carts, and they would go through the country and through the city and sell little bits of pots and pans and pieces of cloth. And they'd also sell songs to people. And so the song that you knew as a child, you would sing, and your friend who knows a printer, they would put something together, and that printed version of the song, now someone who can read gets a hold of that, sings it to their illiterate friends. And in an illiterate culture or semi-literate culture, it's a culture of memorizers. And so if you can't read, how do you know how to get to the store? Well, you have to remember. How do you know the names of your neighbors? Well, you have to remember. How do you know anything that's important to life? You have to use your memory. So you have this incredible mnemonic ability. It's probably, and I would say these days, ours is kind of shrinking with every little gadget that, that is helping us not think so much. Well, it's the opposite in Shakespeare's London. People are using memorization as the great tool. And so they've memorized these songs. The songs are being transferred to paper, people who can read are reading those songs to others. And so, okay, so you asked, all right, we'll split it into these three tiers. So in the more educated households, literacy is higher. And there is this surge in musical education. So the court of the Tudors is a very musical court. Henry is a composer. His daughters play the virginals and probably the lute, very much dancing. And so people in the court, people like the Boleyn sisters, they're all musical. And so music becomes this sort of this idea of fashionable sort of, if you're this elite sort of pastime, and that everybody who wants to move up in the world is trying to copy what the Tudors and their people who surround them do. And so we've got folks who've got some money, people who want to move up in society, are teaching their sons and particularly their daughters, interestingly, to play music, because to have a bride who's musical is an asset in these in sort of social interactions when people are mingling and making deals. To have your wife or your son show that kind of erudition, the Renaissance man and Renaissance woman, very fashionable and attractive. And of course, if you have a daughter who is very attractive as a sort of social tool for your husband, they're very marriageable. And that means property for you, if you can marry your daughter off to something like that. And so huge amounts of money is being spent on musical education. So with that, they would hire tutors. So musicians in the town and musicians in the city are being hired, and sometimes from outside. If you were really, really high up, you might bring in somebody from Italy or from the Low Countries to teach your kids. These people are publishing. There are other musicians who are also publishing, and one of the sort of very popular music publications is this thing called a lute book. People like John Dowland, for example, they will publish a book of lute songs, and you buy the book, you take it home, and you play it to entertain yourselves and your guests. Some of these were really interesting pieces of paper where you would have the parts would be sort of one here, one here, one here, and one here. Very small music and voice. And so people could sit at a table with their instruments and have fun together in this kind of social situation. So these particular songs are very, very popular. Dowland's music was extremely popular. The printings go into second and third printings. So what happens? Folks who are at the sort of more elite levels, and anybody with money, they all know the songs. And you're in this culture of memorizers. They all know the songs and they know them very, very well. So that's the second chunk. You've got, church music, liturgical music. Then you've got the sort of elites who are learning these art songs, these lute songs. And then you have the sort of general I don't mean to go higher or lower, but yeah. You have people who are making less money, the leather workers, the laborers, the grocers, the people who are working in more sort of laborious, lower level jobs. Well, the literacy level is now quite low. These folks are part of that culture that I've been talking about. They've been memorizing these songs that have been transferred to print and then transferred back. And so that gives the rise of the broadside ballad. So sort of early 16th, mid 16th century, late 16th century, so 1560, 1580, there's this, we find this real surge of these printed sheets of paper, about half the size of a newspaper, folio size. And what they contain on them are lyrics. And these lyrics, there's actually little music because it's a tune that everybody knows. Say, for example, Greensleeves, a very popular English song. Everybody knows the tune. And so this art form would take new lyrics and put them on an old tune that everyone would know. And the fun thing to do would be to sit around and sing these new lyrics on the old tune. We have residue of that culture now. If you take the Greensleeves song, da 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 da, that we have the original lyrics, Greensleeves was my only joy, but we also have this is Christ the King, the Christmas carol, right? So, and that's a sort of leftover from that culture of taking tunes that everybody knows and putting new lyrics upon them. So this fashion, this trend explodes in early modern England. So there's about maybe 200,000 people in London in 1590. Sorry for the estimate. I know people are probably going to go, hey, wait a second. There are some of the estimates of ballad copies, so printings, between 3 and 4 million at this time. Not kidding. People pasted these songs around their hearths. And we find the old songs that aren't popular anymore, the old printings aren't popular, they're in the outhouse. They're in the bakers, they're wrapping things in them. These things are everywhere. And you can find them on the walls of alehouses. All of these lyrics set to these popular tunes. And the subject matter is just crazy. So we have political events. We have songs, of course. We have almost sort of news, tabloid news of sort of monstrous births and battles that have happened somewhere, or if a particular noble, say the Earl of Essex, gets in trouble and, after the Ireland thing, well, there's a ballad about him. We can all read about it to the tune of, a song like Fortune My Foe, which was a popular da 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 da, and a poor Earl of Essex, he's now dead, so these things are everywhere. And some of the songs are extremely popular. And we know that because we find subsequent printings that go on 10, 20, 30, 100 years. Same song is continuously printed. Why? Well, presumably because it's popular. And so if we're in this memorizing culture, we have people, everybody knows the songs, just as everybody would know much of the Bible. and those kinds of stories. And so that's the final tier. People are singing these from memory. They're singing them in the ale house. They're singing them while they're milking the cow or driving the cart. Some people are reading them to their friends. They're memorizing them, maybe changing something. A printer grabs it, publishes a new one. People are singing that. And it's as popular as the popular music scene today. Everybody knows the songs. Because they were so popular, various interest groups would try to sort of co-opt them. So sometimes you would get a song that would be like a warning to fair women to not engage in sinful behavior, and it would be some song that would have something to do with some kind of downfall or terrible thing. And it would have the story of a woman who's done something bad, probably sexually, and is now in big trouble and has been shunned or ostracized. So there was lots of stuff like that. And they would come from the perhaps more Puritan side of the culture. They would sort of pay for these things to be printed, and out they would come. Then you would have the Greek myths. Queen Dido is a very popular, the whole from the Aeneid, that's represented in ballads. People love the monsters. So you find, a two-headed pig is born somewhere. So very much the kind of tabloid thing. Those are quite popular. And you can tell that they're popular because of the subsequent printings. And some of them had very elaborate pictures on them. And the pictures were made with these things called wood blocks. So you would carve out a picture in a block. And as you printed the ballad, the block itself would be part of that. And it would stamp this kind of crude picture of Siamese twins, and then it would say monstrous birth born in the country, and it would be some terror. And most of the verse, by the way, Patricio, is terrible. It's brutal because it's set up to make a buck. It's set up, get it out quickly, something interesting that people like. There are characters. Characters of literature. For example, if you've ever, I think is it the Knight's Tale? The story of Patient Grisel, about the woman who, the commoner who is married by a duke who puts her through these horrible trials, and basically tortures her to prove her worthiness in the sort of medieval sense as a patient bride, someone who will do anything her lord says, who's ultimately loyal to the nth degree. A very common popular ballad that was actually, and it comes from ultimately Boccaccio and Chaucer. And so works of literature that the illiterate would never have access to are brought out in kind of ballad form. And very interestingly, there's a wonderful play by Thomas Dekker called Patient Grisel. It comes out in 1599. And part of my work was trying to determine how much of the play came from the Boccaccio and the Chaucer. And it turns out actually a lot of it comes from the ballad. And why is that? Well, it makes perfect sense because, of course, a huge portion of the audience has never read Boccaccio, but they certainly know the ballad story. And so that's where it gets very, very interesting. So I hope that answers the question. I'm not sure what the most popular, sort of the Hey Jude of ballad, but I'm not sure. I'd have to look that one up to give you a guess. It's hard to know. It's hard to know because the printing, you'd have to, if you're going to print something, you have to run it through the station, you have to register with the stationer. But there was a lot of sort of unregistered, surreptitious print culture back then. It's the closest thing we have kind of to the unregulated nature of the internet now. There were these things called liables that you could, in a little bit surreptitious printing that said something terrible about King James and his appetite for nice looking people in his bedchamber, that sort of stuff. So there's that element as well. So it's very hard to determine, okay, what was the most popular thing or not. So many of the popular ballad sellers, people like Thomas Deloney, for example, you would get a license to print and you would hold that license. But copyright, taking somebody's work, especially work that have come out of oral culture, it's kind of a free-for-all. in a way. So there is some hold. People would have some hold on the copies that they were selling, but that hold was always kind of tenuous and difficult to maintain. Playwrights used the songs, be they art songs, be they broadside ballads, popular ballads, the same way they would use religious material or Greek myths or Ovid. In exactly the same way, they understood that their audience was very experienced with the songs and their stories, and so they used them often in very deep, interesting ways. It is very unclear. It's unclear in many places whether a character sings or not, and so much of my work is really the intertextual, just the verbal references and what was the song about, and so what's going on. So, for example, if we're talking about Ophelia, in her madness scene, when they come upon her, and she almost sort of barks out, where is the majesty of Denmark? And she's almost in a kind of oracular way. She's not herself, and Gertrude is sort of worried about what she might say. You better be careful, because who knows what's going to come out of her mouth. We're not really sure. This is, in one way, it's a very interesting device here, because it sets the audience to kind of go, well, what's she going to say now? What's going on? And the first thing that comes out of her mouth is I think it's the second stanza of a ballad entitled Walsingham, which, and I'm going to just make sure if I get the words right here. It's how should I your true love know from another one by his cockle hat and staff and his sandal shoon. So the song itself, if you go and have a look at it, it's in a manuscript form, and you can find it in Bishop Piercy's folio manuscript. So this fellow in the 1750s found a huge a huge group of manuscript ballads sitting at a fireplace. Somebody was throwing them in the fire, and he went, "Oh, give me that," and turned it into this huge sort of compendium or volume of these manuscript ballads. The ballad is about a person who is searching for their lover, who's female. It's a man who's walking on a trail. It's a pilgrimage route to the shrine of the Lady Walsingham, which was ultimately destroyed by Henry VIII. But the person is searching for this woman who's gone on this pilgrimage. It was a famous site for curing fertility. It was a site of female pilgrimage. And so Ophelia is speaking it's a conversation. The ballad is a conversation. So one person says, have you seen my love who's on this pilgrimage? And Ophelia is playing the part of the person who's already on the pilgrimage, who turns back and says, I wouldn't know what they looked like because everybody's dressed in similar ways. I have no idea. And then the ballad goes on, and the singer himself speaks about love and how fickle it is and how it's left him lonely and abandoned. And so the reader is left wondering, sort of like Gertrude, well, what is actually coming out of Ophelia's mouth? Is she speaking of Hamlet, who has at that moment kind of got off on a sort of, not really a pilgrimage himself, but something similar? Is she speaking of Polonius? Is she speaking of herself, because she has kind of fled the pressures of this kind of patriarchal dysfunction that's happening, this toxic situation? So who is she speaking about? And if you understand the ballad, underneath there is this underlying pathos, this abandonment. And you can understand that perhaps it's related to that horrible abandonment and that feeling of being lost and searching for somebody she's expressing herself through through this song. Okay, so that's just one example. If you know the song, you can understand and enjoy that sort of vagary, that kind of, okay, what could it be? If you understand the song, there could be a whole lot of things. And of course, Shakespeare does this in thousands of references, these ambiguities that are so wonderful that we can enjoy. And he's doing the same thing with ballads often. Now, we could certainly chat about Ophelia and the lute if you want to get back to that.
All right.
Okay, so one of the things that I did, what I noticed as I was looking at popular music and how it's represented in the drama, especially when women perform, the view at the time when I was doing the research was that any public performance by an elite was not desired. And so the common understanding amongst scholars at the time, and you can understand why they would have it, is that elites would never perform in a sort of public situation. This understanding comes from Puritan polemists who speak about it, and also from these books that were popular at the time of Shakespeare called conduct manuals, where you would have this sort of outline of how gentlemen behave. And there were many for gentlemen and a couple for women. And what was interesting about that, and I found that something just didn't jive with me when I was listening to other commentators who would say that the problem isn't just that Ophelia, when she sings in front of the court of Denmark, isn't just singing pop songs. It's the fact that she sings at all that is crazy. That would never happen. And that didn't quite sit with me. And so I went on a sort of discovery. And that turned in ultimately to an article in the compendium of essays, Shakespeare, Music and Performance, where I discovered that, in fact, public performance by females is perfectly fine as long as it's within their own social sphere. So rich families, people from the court, there were many gatherings of sort of upper class people together, and there were celebrations of many different kinds, and many different and large numbers of people would be together at these things where somebody would perform. There would be dancing, of course, and someone would also perform. The idea that a woman could only perform sort of in her bedchamber while no one was looking, it's not true at all. And in fact, it appears that female musical performance was a desired and expected activity in these, not absolutely public, but certainly public within that your own social circle. So in the countryside, there's records of large country houses taking sort of entourages of people over to somebody else's house, and everybody hangs out for a while. During those times, it seems pretty clear that musical performance was part of that activity. And it makes sense because when we're thinking about establishing familial relationships, setting up marriages and those things, if we're training our young women to perform, we want them to perform in front of people. And ultimately, you would have young women performing in larger gatherings. Why? Well, to attract a husband, to attract somebody who might think, okay, maybe this is somebody for my son. And so if you move back to Ophelia, what you get then is the fact that she performs is not unusual at all. It's what she performs that's crazy. Somebody like Ophelia, in a performance, say in front of the court or in some kind of special occasion, a young woman presenting her talents, would be performing art song, would be performing something more sophisticated. When we read the songs that she sings, they sound like street ballads. Some of them are kind of lascivious. That is the mad version of a performance that would happen. So Shakespeare delivers to us this kind of mad, sort of upside down version of what we would normally see, a corrupted version of what everybody would understand is perfectly fine for a young lady to do. So when she comes out on that lute, it would be something that, okay, but wait a second, this isn't what we would normally see. It's, you know, it's like we're in a kind of alternate universe where, yeah, she's still on the lute, but it's the music that's perhaps a courtesan or a prostitute might be singing. And that in itself is the mad part about it. So Shakespeare's characters often have these sort of psychic moments where they sort of understand what's going on, but they haven't quite articulated it consciously in their own, you know, in their own minds. And so we very much have a sort of swan song situation where Ophelia ultimately, somewhere in that characterization is this idea that she is understanding, actually, maybe not in the forefront of her mind, where this is going. And the lyrics of the song correspond to that melancholy, very sort of downtrodden feeling that go with it. The witch's chant, that I don't think that comes from the popular music sphere. So it's hard for me to comment on that. I think and this is just out of my sleeve, I think it's something that Shakespeare probably made up. It's something it's set up as a chant in that sort of dactylic da-da, da-da, da-da. As far as comedies go, yeah, there are many, many moments, the same sort of idea, where people like Malvolio and Augachik in Twelfth Night, and they are singing various songs. And oftentimes, I think in that scene, he's drunk and he and his friends are just singing kind of songs from the ballads. It sort of adds to that atmosphere. There's a wonderful moment actually in, I think is it the Merry Wives of Windsor where, or no, it may be in the fourth, I think it's Henry IV, part one, where Falstaff walks on scene and he sings, he's humming a song, and it's a song about King Arthur, when Arthur in first, I can't remember exactly the lyrics, but the song itself, and as he's singing it, he turns and he shouts, "Somebody empty the Jordan," which is the chamber pot in the room. And if you research the song is about knightly deeds. It's right out of that medieval romance kind of vibe. And so the song itself is about sort of the noblest knight that you could imagine. And when Falstaff walks in, he's singing this song and everybody would know it. And then he says, "Please take out the toilet." You know, it just, the juxtaposition of those two things makes it very clear that Falstaff is no King Arthur. You know, it's wonderfully funny. So there's all sorts of moments like that. That's a good question. And I don't have an exact answer for that, but there was a group in London called the City Waits, who were professional musicians that a person could bring to entertain a particular moment. You could sort of hire them out, right? There are records of course, performances by elites. There's a really interesting moment that I discovered where a Puritan minister has someone over, and the sort of highlight of the night is a performance by his daughter, for this other Puritan minister, which kind of goes against a lot of what we might think, but the Puritans themselves actually were very interested in music and enjoyed it very much. So I can't think offhand of any moments where you would have, live from the globe. It's, the city waits. I can't, but I'd have to think about that. Yeah, I mean, of course, there was many of the boys' plays sort of after about 1609. The boys' plays in the indoor theaters, of course, these young kids were singing in the choir too. And so it would almost be like a real musical extravaganza. And then, of course, there would be the music of the masks, which would be very spectacular, I'm sure. England was enormously influenced by Italy and the Low Countries. The fashion, certainly the drama. I mean, Shakespeare pulls many of his plots from Italian literature, and many of the musicians who were working in the court were taken from the Low Countries and Italy. Britain was not the cultural locus of Europe at the time. Italy was, and Florence, and so, I mean, we've got, so I'm sure that the influence from Florence is permeating into the music of the time. I would guess that, I mean, we're talking about what 1607 is the first opera. And so I'm guessing that would have had probably a significant influence on the court masque, which would have been, it would be much more elaborate, much more money devoted to something like that, and much more the sort of attention and the purview of the serious professional musicians who would be in the employ of the crown, who would be coming from Italy and be right up on the latest trends. So I would guess, yes, I'd bet money that absolutely. But as far as the Shakespeare's company and the Admiral's Men and the rest of them, most of the music, it appears, was supplied by the players themselves. And so there may have been some professional musicians involved that would come from outside for perhaps a particular performance. But it appears that it's more, if you think about some of the clowns who had huge skills and, of course, could play instruments, it's likely that there would be a doubling of duties as well. So the serious sort of professional musicians, you'd find them at court. You might find them in the Chapel Royal, not really on the Shakespearean stage to near the same degree. I would just say that to anybody, if you're interested in this, there are several wonderful books that you can go after, and there are some recordings now. The one by Duffin that I mentioned comes with a CD, and you can hear, and some of them are conjectural melodies, but some of them are quite close. And just because we're in the digital age now, much of my research involved having access to private libraries, places where you need a subscription. But if you're diligent now, you may not get to look at the primary sources, but you can probably find compendiums from the 19th century of basically all of these things and get that access to those song references with some diligence in about an hour. You can find a lot. And I would say to the young people, when you find these songs and you get that access and you're in a play and you're interested in it, slow down and just read the song, enjoy what it is, think about it, internalize it, and then turn back, and with the understanding that all that meaning that you are detecting is probably there. because people had a very much a sort of deep consciousness of these songs. If you think about a song that you know deeply, that has been with you in the car and on the plane and going to school, and how well you know that voice. Well, when we listen to Ophelia and those songs, or if we go on Othello and listen to, Iago singing drinking songs to get Cassio drunk, they knew those songs intimately. And so all of those implications probably were going on. And so enjoy that. That's the wonderful richness of it. And it's why, sort of just another reason why these plays are still with us and flooding our imagination with interesting things. It's one of the first plays that really charged me up about the research. One of those moments is Act 2, Scene 3 in Othello. And so we know the scene very well. Iago is trying to sabotage Cassio. He's trying to get him drunk because he knows Cassio has a temper. And so he's saying to Cassio, come on, let's party. And Cassio's going, look, I'm on the watch. I shouldn't be doing this, really, honestly. And Iago's going, oh, come on, it's one drink, one cup, it'll be great. And he starts singing drinking songs. The first one is, and let the cannikin clink. And we're not quite sure exactly the source of that song. There's been some conjecture about where that may come from, and so some interesting possibilities, but the second one is different. He sings a song that begins, King Stephen was a worthy peer, his breeches cost him but a crown. He thought, I think, 6 pence or 5 pence was too dear, and he called the tailor loun, or a clown. He's angry about the price of his breeches. And then as we move along, Iago's plan works. Cassio loses his temper, and as Iago puts it, is cashiered. Well, what's interesting about the song that he sings is that it comes from an old manuscript ballad called Bell, My Wife. And the song is about a man who is a poor farmer, and he's working in the field, and he wants to go into court and kind of make his fortune. And his wife convinces him not to do it. Don't go and kind of get involved in politics and sort of make trouble for your own gain. She says, keep thy old cloak. It's called Bell, My Wife, or the old cloak, it's also referred to. Keep thy old cloak about you. And he says, okay, that's what I'm going to do, meaning that your lot in life, your cloak, your clothing, your profession, that's yours. Keep it about you. Be proud of it. Stop trying to go and sort of mingle to maybe get a new cloak and better yourself. But what's interesting about it is the line in the ballad that Iago, that stanza, it's King Harry was a worthy peer, not King Stephen. And if you read Holinshed and the others, the history, you discover that there's only one King Stephen, and King Stephen is noted for being one of the most duplicitous rulers, and is associated with anarchy and war and terribleness. And so Iago makes a little king switch when he sings the song. And so if you understand the song, you understand that Iago is actually not really singing to Cassio as much as he's singing to us in the audience. He's kind of going, guess who I am, right? And of course, he turns out to be just that, somebody who mingles in the politics and machinations of the court and causes incredible chaos. And of course, the most duplicitous character, perhaps, in Shakespeare's works. And so that reference can go by in a second, and no one would ever figure it out, but you can bet your life that the people in the audience would have gone, oh, he said that. It would be like if you changed, the words to a song that we all know by heart. So yeah, it's a wonderful reference. And as I was beginning my studies, when I read that, I thought, this is cool, basically. I got to do this. This is really fun. I'll bet there's tons more moments like this, and there are. There's often associated a kind of, and I don't want to say sort of snobbery, but a kind of like you've got to be kind of brilliantly intelligent to understand this sort of stuff. And coming from a pop music side, being a musician in the past, I sort of came to realize that intelligence doesn't have to sort of involve many 5-syllable words in succession. Pop music in itself, the best pop music, says deep, rich things very simply. And so engaging Shakespeare in that way, relating it to the language and vernacular and the way we converse now casually, well, that's the way it was spoken about in the time too. Yeah. And so I enjoy kind of having those kinds of conversations. It kind of demystifies it. I don't know if I've been very clear there, but
this is what I found interesting about you, because you're talking about popular music. You've been a pop musician. So you can, it's not like some scholar in a library trying to understand. It's like, well, you've been there. You try to, sell your records and, please the fans and try to write your songs.
Other people's records, not mine.
Do you have a link to that band? Do you want us to publish the link? Do you have any YouTube video of you?
No, man. I was a side guy, and I was very happy to be a side guy. They would say, "Oh, hello, are you in the band?" And I would say, "Yes, I am." And they would say, "Where's the singer?" And I would say, "He's right over there. Go right ahead." And I would go home to my wife and be a happy man. But anyway.
Well, that's the official version. That's the official version. Let's keep it that way.
Well, some other time, perhaps we can tell me some stories. Yes, I can do that. But anyway, music isn't like that. Music is a social smoother first. It allows us to do and say things that would be uncomfortable in other situations. It's a wonderful social tool to bring people together. And so, sure, you don't have a landlord isn't gonna, or the king isn't gonna go sit in a bar and play a lute, because that will demean his stature, but he's gonna play to 200 members of the court, sure. So anyway.
Thank you so much, Paul.
Pleasure.
Bye-bye.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Bye.